At 82 years old, my own son changed the locks on the house I paid for, and my daughter-in-law stood behind that door and told me to figure it out myself. And 8 months later, I was the one holding the only set of keys to it, watching the two of them carry cardboard boxes down to the curb. Before I get into any of it, I want to thank you for being here, because time is the one thing nobody ever gets more of, and you're spending a piece of yours on an old man. If you can spare it, tap that, hit subscribe. That little bit of nothing is honestly the whole reason a small channel like this one keeps breathing. And tell me what town you're listening from. Write it down there in the comments. I go through every single one of them, and I'll say your name out loud in the next video. 11 degrees. That's what it was that night. Wind coming off the lake and up over the hill the way it does here. And I'd just come from a funeral, still in the suit, and my key would not turn in my own front door. I jiggled it like an idiot, took my glove off and tried it with my bare hand, and the metal burned my fingers. Then I stepped back far enough to see that the doorknob was brand new, shiny, still had the little barcode sticker on the underside of the plate. That's when I saw the bags. 4 black contractor bags on the concrete step by the downspout, the heavy kind, and one of them had split at the corner, and the sleeve of my green flannel shirt was hanging out of it. I rang the bell. Shelby came to the door, and she did not open it. She talked at me through the wood with her arms crossed, in this flat, rehearsed little voice, like she'd been saying it to the mirror all afternoon. "Walter, this isn't a good time." I said, "Shelby, it's 11 degrees out here." And she said, "Well, you've got money. Figure it out yourself." Then the hallway light went off. Okay. So, for any of that to land on you the way it landed on me, I have to take you back a ways, and I'll be quick about it, because there was a thing that happened 11 months before that night, in a room I was asleep in, that not one person in that house ever thought I would find out about. My name is Walter. Walt, mostly. Milwaukee, born on the south side, baptized at St. Josaphat, 41 years a tool and die maker in a shop down in the Menominee Valley, where the ceiling leaked every March, and you could smell the cutting oil in your coat 2 days later. I made little steel things that go inside bigger things. I was good at it, and there was a time in this city when that was a whole entire life. My wife was Irene, 53 years. Same neighborhood, same church, and she used to say she married me because I was the only boy at the dance who didn't smell like his father's beer. She passed in the fall of 2019. Pancreatic. 11 weeks from the day they told us to the day I sat in a room at Frodtert holding her hand while it went cold. I won't spend a lot of time on that part because I still can't, but you should know she's underneath everything I'm about to tell you. We had one kid, Gregory. Greg was a good boy. That's the truth, and I won't rewrite it just because of how it ended. Hockey at Pulaski wasn't the fastest, but he'd take a hit, and I sat in those freezing rinks at 6 in the morning with a thermos thinking I was the luckiest man in Wisconsin. He wasn't a shop guy. Business degree, something with logistics software, and I never understood what he did all day, and he never understood what I did. And for years that was fine. We had the Brewers. He married Shelby in 2007. I know how it sounds when an old man starts in about his daughter-in-law. And for a long time, honest to God, I liked her. Organized in a way that made Irene laugh. All those little labeled bins. And when the grandkids came, Nolan first and Maddie 4 years later, she was a good mother to them. But she kept score. Everything was a ledger. Who paid? Who drove? Who said what at Thanksgiving in 2011? And when Irene died and I was wandering my own house like a man looking for the glasses on top of his own head, Shelby was the one who started saying it. "Walter, this house is too much for you. Walter, the stairs. Walter, what happens if you fall?" I had a duplex on South Superior Street in Bayview. Bought it in 1974 for less than a decent used car costs now. My workbench in the basement. Irene's rosebush by the gangway that never should have survived a Milwaukee winter, and somehow did, every year, like it was arguing with me. They started in on me maybe 14 months after the funeral. Greg softer, always the one saying, "Dad, we just worry about you. The plan was this, sell Bayview, buy a house in Wauwatosa near them, big enough for all of us. Build an addition off the back, a proper in-law suite with its own bathroom and its own door to the driveway, so I could come and go like a person and not a guest. 20 steps from the grandkids. Somebody would hear me if I went down. And I wanted it. I was lonely in a way I didn't have the words for, 3 days at a stretch without hearing a voice that wasn't on the radio. So I said yes. Pay attention here, because everything that happened later comes out of the way we did the money. I sold Bayview for $295,000, signed away 50 years of my life in about 9 minutes in a title office on Howell Avenue, then sat in my Buick in the parking lot a good while before I could drive. Then I bought the house on North 68th Street in Wauwatosa, $410,000. Bayview money plus most of everything Irene and I had saved, cash, and the deed came back with one name on it, Walter S. Kaminsky. And then we did the land contract. If you've never had a reason to know what that is, a land contract is a thing we use in Wisconsin all the time. I own the house. The title stays with me, and the buyer pays me every month like I'm the bank. When they finish paying, the deed transfers. Until then, it's mine. Greg and Shelby were going to pay me $1,800 a month for 15 years, and at the end of it the house would be theirs free and clear, and I'd have been dead about a decade by then, and everybody would be happy. We recorded it downtown at the Register of Deeds, in the courthouse on 9th Street. Stamped, numbered, filed. Public record. Greg signed. Shelby signed. I signed with the pen my foreman gave me when I retired. Then, I paid $86,000 more to build the in-law suite off the back. Contractor out of West Allis, a guy named Dennis. Every invoice in my name. Every checkout of my account. Remember that. I moved in on a Saturday in June. Maddie made a sign with markers that said, "Welcome home, Grandpa," and taped it crooked on my door, and I left that sign up for 2.5 years. And honestly, it's the reason I didn't do anything sooner. A crooked sign made by a 9-year-old. That's what it cost to keep me quiet. They paid me for 4 months. 4. Then it started. The car needed a transmission. Nolan's Travel Hockey, and I knew what that cost. I'd paid it once already for his father. Shelby got laid off from the clinic. Greg said, "Dad, we'll catch up on it, I promise. Just give us till spring." And I said, "Of course, don't be silly, it's a bookkeeping thing." 26 months. 26 months they lived in my house and did not send me $1. I did the math one night at my kitchen table with a pencil and a Brewers game on low, and it came to $46,800, and I wrote it on the back of a Sendik's receipt and then crumpled it up and threw it away. Because he's my son, and I still went out and snowblowed their driveway. Because at 82 I still could, and because I liked the way the neighbors waved. That was the good part. I'm done with the good part now, and I want you to hold on to something, because it took me a long time to see it. By that winter, the thing that was going to destroy them was already sitting downtown in a filing cabinet with a stamp on it, waiting. The first week of February, my friend Bud Tomczak died. We started at the shop the same month in 1963, and he had a laugh like a car that wouldn't turn over. Funeral mass at the Basilica, lunch downstairs in the church hall, ham sandwiches and a cut glass bowl of pickles. And I stayed too long because there were only 9 of us left from the old crew, and I didn't want to be the first one to put his coat on. I got back to 68th Street around 8:30 at night, and you already know what was waiting for me on that step. Here's what I didn't tell you. Next to those bags, there was a milk crate. My radio was in it, and so was the framed picture of Irene from Door County, the one from 1988 where she's laughing at something I said, and I can never remember what it was. They put Irene in a milk crate, and while Shelby was talking at me through that door, I could see past the curtain in the little window, straight down the hall into the kitchen. Greg was standing at the counter with his back to me and his shoulders up around his ears. He never turned around. He knew I was out there, and he stood there and looked at the sink. She told me there had been a conversation about the locks. There was never a conversation about the locks. There was never anything close to one. I stood out there I don't know how long. Long enough that when I moved, my knee had locked up. I took the milk crate first because of Irene, then went back for the bags, 3 trips. The whole time I kept waiting for that door to open. Every trip up the walk I thought, now. Now he comes out in his socks the way he did when he was 6 and I got home late. He didn't come out. I drove to the George Webb on North Avenue. Little chrome diner, open all night. Cheap coffee. I sat in a booth by the window from 9:30 at night until almost 4 in the morning, and a waitress named Tanya kept filling my cup, and after the second hour she stopped asking and just left the pot. Around 1 in the morning she sat down across from me. "You okay, hon?" I said. "My son locked me out of my house." She said, "That's a hell of a thing," and got up and brought me a piece of pie I didn't ask for, and never charged me for it. And that woman will never know what she did for me that night. I want to tell you I cried. I didn't. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the shaking stopped, and something quiet came in behind it. The same thing I used to feel at the shop when a machine went wrong, and everybody else was yelling. And I could see, plain as day, exactly which bolt had sheared. Because here's the thing Shelby didn't know. Here's the thing my son had let himself forget. Sitting in that kitchen with his back to me. That was not their house. That was never their house. Not for 1 hour. Not for 1 day. Not 1 square inch of it. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I was standing at the counter of the Register of Deeds in the Milwaukee County Courthouse with a coffee I'd bought from a cart, wearing yesterday's suit from the funeral, and I asked a very patient young woman to pull the file on the property at that address on North 68th Street. $2. Land contract, recorded, document number and all. My name as the vendor, and under it a payment schedule anybody could hold up next to a bank statement. $2 to be told what I already knew. I stood in that marble hallway with the paper in my hand, and for the first time in 26 months I could feel my own heartbeat. Then I called Marcy Kubiak. Marcy's father was Stash Kubiak, worked the surface grinder 3 benches down from me for 19 years. I held Marcy when she was 4 days old. She's a lawyer now, office on Oklahoma Avenue above an insurance agency. And when I called at 9:30 and told her where I'd slept, there was a pause, and then she said one word I won't repeat. And then, "Walter, get over here. Don't stop for anything." I sat in her office and put everything on her desk. This is where it turned, and it wasn't luck. I am a man who was trained for 41 years to keep records. You cut a die wrong. You don't get to argue about it. The tolerance is the tolerance. So I had a green accordion folder that came with me from Bayview. Every closing document from the duplex. Every invoice from Dennis the contractor with my name at the top. The check register where I'd written in pencil, in my own hand, the date and amount of everything I ever paid for in that house. And God help me, the $400 I gave Greg for Nolan's hockey skates. And then there was the phone. Because I'm the one who bought the doorbell camera. Got up on the ladder myself, which Irene would have killed me for. Drilled the hole, ran the wire, and when it asked me to make an account, I made one on my email. Password is my wife's confirmation name and the year we were married. Nobody ever thought about it again. To them, it was a thing on the wall that made a noise. That camera was still mailing me clips every time somebody walked up to that door. Marcy went very still. She said, "Walter, do you still have last night?" I did. 22 seconds. Shelby's voice coming right through the wood, clear as a bell. "You've got money. Figure it out yourself." Marcy sent the notice of default 11 days later. Certified mail, green card, the whole business, under a land contract in this state. When you don't pay, the seller goes to court and asks for what they call strict foreclosure. And strict foreclosure is a mean, clean little thing. No auction. The judge sets a redemption period, a window, and if you don't hand over every dollar you owe inside that window, your interest in the property is gone, extinguished. Everything you ever paid in stays with the seller. They had paid me 4 months, 4 out of 30. Greg called me the day the letter landed. I was staying in a room at a Super 8 out on Blue Mound Road, next to the cops, eating custard for dinner like a fool. He was crying. That's the first thing. My son, 54 years old, sobbing into a telephone, and it did something to my chest that I don't have a word for. Dad, what are you doing? This is our home. I said, Greg, whose name is on the deed? Dad, come on. Whose name is on the deed, Greg? And he was quiet, and then he said it. Are you seriously going to put your grandchildren on the street? There it is. 26 months of my money, my house, my rose bush that I dug out of the gangway in Bayview and hauled across town in a 5-gallon bucket. And the first move he makes is to pick up Nolan and Maddie and hold them in front of himself like a shield. I said, I slept in a diner, Greg. He said, that was Shelby. I said, I know. And I hung up on my son. And then I sat on the end of a motel bed, and I ate a cup of butter pecan custard with a little wooden spoon, and my hands would not stop shaking. Now you'd think that's the fight. It wasn't. That was the warm-up. Because Shelby did not fold, Shelby got creative. And I'll tell you exactly what she did, because this is the part that scared me. 3 weeks later, I got served with a guardianship petition. She filed to have me declared incompetent. She went into the probate court in this county and swore, on paper, that Walter Kaminsky had dementia, that he was confused about his assets, that he had wandered from the family home in the middle of a winter night in a state of distress. And she attached a photograph. I want you to hear this. She attached a photograph of the 4 black bags on that porch and captioned it as proof that I'd packed up my belongings in a fit of paranoia and left. She used the bag she put me out with as proof I was crazy, and she asked the court to appoint her my guardian, meaning she signs for me. She controls my accounts. She decides where I live. And, oh, look at that. She'd have had the authority to settle the very lawsuit I had just filed against her. They granted her a temporary order. It's supposed to be a protective thing for people who are actually in danger, and a commissioner looked at a sworn statement from a woman with a nice haircut and a folder and signed it pending a hearing. My checking account was frozen on a Tuesday. I found out at the Pick and Save on 76th Street with $14 of groceries on the belt and a line behind me. Card declined twice. And the kid at the register said, "Sorry, sir," and looked at the floor. And I put the groceries back myself, one at a time, because I wasn't going to make him do it. That was the bottom. I sat on that motel bed with my coat on until it got dark and never turned a light on. And there was a good long stretch where I thought, just sign whatever she wants. You're 82. Give her the house. Go to a home out in New Berlin. Let them wheel you into a hallway that smells like green beans. And be done. Marcy paid the filing fee out of her own pocket that week and never once mentioned it. I found out from her secretary a year later. The court appointed a guardian ad litem, That's a lawyer whose job is to represent me and only me. An older gentleman named Halloran with a bad hip and no patience left in the tank. And they ordered an evaluation with a geriatric physician over at the medical college, a Dr. Agarwal, who spent 2 hours with me on a Thursday. She asked me the date. She asked who the governor was. Had me draw a clock face showing 10 past 11. Gave me 3 words to hand back to her later. Then she asked what I used to do for a living, and I got going the way you do, and I ended up drawing her a cross-section of a progressive stamping die on the back of her intake form, explaining what happens if your clearance is off by 0.02 of an inch. The 3 words were apple, penny, and table. Her report came back with a line Marcy read out loud in the hallway with something moving behind her eyes. No evidence of cognitive impairment of any kind. And the patient's recall and reasoning were, and I'm quoting because I've read it maybe 200 times, superior to the examiner's own expectations for a man half his age. But here's the part that broke it wide open, and it's the part that makes me think there's something in this world keeping a ledger of its own. While all that was going on, Halloran did his job. Went down to the Register of Deeds himself because he wanted to see the property records with his own eyes. And he came back with 2 documents, the land contract and a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed transferring the property on North 68th Street from Walter S. Kaminsky to Gregory and Shelby Kaminsky, husband and wife, as joint tenants. Signed, notarized, recorded the spring before. I had never seen it in my life. The signature said Walter Kaminsky, not Walter S. Kaminsky. I have signed my name with that S in it since 2nd grade at St. Josephat, when a nun named Sister Bernice told me a man's whole name belongs to him and he ought to use all of it. My father was Stanislaw. There is not one legal document in 82 years where I left that S out, and the date on it. The 14th of March, the year before. On the 14th of March that year, I was under general anesthesia at Aurora St. Luke's on the south side, having a total hip replacement. Marcy pulled the records. Anesthesia start time, 7:51 in the morning. Out of the recovery unit at 1:40 in the afternoon. Discharged 3 days later with a walker and a prescription for oxycodone that I never finished, and still had in the original bottle, with the pharmacy label and the fill date on it, in a milk crate in the trunk of my Buick. The notary was a woman named Kayla Brenner, Shelby's cousin. They took my house while I was asleep on a table, and when that didn't take, when a lawyer's letter showed up saying the whole thing was a fraud, then, and only then, did she decide that the safest place for me was under her guardianship, where I couldn't say a word about any of it. You want to know the wildest part? If she'd just paid me $1,800 a month, less than the payment on the SUV in that driveway. If she had just paid me, she'd own that house today, and I'd have been dead in it, happy, with a crooked sign on my door. The hearing was in June. Milwaukee County Courthouse, 4th floor, 91 degrees outside, and the air conditioning in that building has never once worked in its life. Shelby came in a navy blue dress with a legal pad. She'd fired her first lawyer and gotten a second one, and I could tell from the way he kept touching his tie that he'd worked out about a week earlier what he was standing in. Kayla Brenner sat in the second row, subpoenaed, 29 years old, chewing the inside of her cheek raw. And when they called her name, she went up there and lasted about 4 minutes. Marcy asked her one question. She held up the deed, and she said, "Ms. Brenner, did Walter Kaminsky appear before you, in person, on March 14th? And Kayla Brenner looked out at the room. She looked at Shelby. Then she looked at me, and I made myself look right back at her. And I did not make a face. I just let her see an old man in his funeral suit. She said, Shelby brought the paper to my apartment. She said he'd already signed it." You could hear the air handler on the roof. Her notary commission was revoked before Labor Day, and it got referred to the district attorney. I saw her once more, out in that fourth-floor hallway, standing by the window with her mother, crying so hard she couldn't get her purse zipped. I didn't feel one drop of joy about it. She was 29, and she did a stupid thing for somebody who told her it was nothing, and the person who put her there had already gone down the stairs. Halloran, the guardian ad litem, filed a report recommending the petition be dismissed and asking the court to consider whether the petitioner had abused the process. He used the word weaponized. Judge Prentice read it, took her glasses off, and looked at Shelby for what felt like a week. She said, "Mrs. Kaminsky, this court exists to protect vulnerable people. You attempted to use it as a crowbar. The temporary order was vacated. My accounts were unfrozen the following Monday. The deed was voided as a forgery, wiped off the record like it never was. And then there was nothing left standing between Shelby Kaminsky and the strict foreclosure. The judge set the redemption period. 60 days to hand me $46,800 in arrears plus costs, or their entire interest in that property was extinguished forever. They didn't have $4,000. Never had it. $900 a month on the SUV, a boat sitting in Greg's brother-in-law's barn, and not $4,000 anywhere on this earth. I know because on day 51 Greg called and asked. He didn't ask me for it. He wanted me to co-sign for it. I said, "Greg, do you hear yourself? You want me to borrow money and give it to you so you can give it back to me and keep my house?" He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "It was never yours, Dad. You bought it for us." And there it is. That's the sentence I'll take with me into the ground. Not Shelby's, through the door, with the wind blowing. Shelby was a stranger who married in. That's just weather. It was never yours. You bought it for us. 53 years of getting up at 4:30 in the morning. A house I sold, a rose bush in a bucket, and what he thought he was owed was all of it, and what he thought I was owed was a bag on a porch. I said, "Then why'd you need a forged deed, son?" He hung up. The sheriff's writ came on a Thursday in October, one of those days where the sky over this city is the color of a nickel and the leaves are down flat on the wet street. I wasn't going to go over there. Marcy told me not to. Then Nolan called me. I haven't told you about Nolan. 16 by then. Big kid. Quiet like I was quiet. He'd been texting me since the second week I was in that motel. "Grandpa, are you eating?" Grandpa the Brewers blew it in the 9th. His mother never knew. He'd sit in his closet and type them. He said, "Grandpa, are you coming?" I said, "Do you want me to?" He said, "Somebody should be here who isn't yelling." So I drove over, parked across from the Katzmarek's mailbox, and sat in the Buick with the engine off. They were carrying boxes down to the curb. Greg had a hand truck. Shelby stood in the middle of the driveway with her phone against her ear, not crying, arguing, still arguing, and every so often she'd stop and point at a box and say something sharp, and Greg would move it. And out of the in-law suite, my in-law suite, the one I paid $86,000 for, came Shelby's mother. Roberta had moved into my rooms 9 days after I moved out. 9 days. She came out the side door with a cardboard box and the heads of 3 ceramic geese sticking out of it. She saw me across the street and stopped dead on the walk, and she raised her chin. This 70-something woman standing in the cold holding a box of geese, and she said it loud enough for the whole block, "You're a hateful old man." And I rolled my window down about 4 inches, and I said, "Roberta, mind the ice by the downspout." She looked at me. Then she looked down at the ice by the downspout, and she stepped around it. That's it. That's my big moment of revenge, if you want to call it that. I told her to watch her step. Shelby got off the phone. She came down that driveway and across the road fast, coat open, no gloves, and she put both hands flat on the roof of my car and bent down to the window. "Are you enjoying this?" I said. "No. You'd have died in that suite in about 4 years, and we'd have buried you, and none of this would have mattered." I said, "That's probably true." And she stood there waiting. I could see it. She wanted me to shout. She wanted one ugly sentence out of me she could carry around and repeat to people at Christmas for the rest of her life. So I gave her nothing. I just let her stand in the cold with her coat hanging open. Then I said, "Shelby, the notary was your cousin." Her mouth moved and nothing came out of it. I said, $1,800 a month. That's all it ever was. Less than the payment on that truck in the driveway. And she said, "It should have been ours." I said, "It was going to be." She came up off the roof of the car. She looked back at the house, at the gutters I cleaned every October, at the driveway I shoveled at 6 in the morning, at my addition with her mother's curtains hanging in the window. She never said another word to me. Not that day, not since. She walked back across the road and stood in the middle of that driveway with her arms straight down at her sides, and I have never once in my life seen a person look so much like somebody standing in a place that doesn't belong to them. Greg came across the street about 20 minutes later and stood by my window. He'd lost weight, gray coming in at his temples that I swear wasn't there in February, and up close he looked so much like my father that for a second I forgot to be angry. He said, "I hope you're happy." I said, "I'm not." He said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "Your mother's cousin in Cudahy has a lower flat sitting empty. I already called her. She's expecting you Saturday. It's clean, and it's cheap, and it's 4 blocks from Maddie's school." And Greg stood there in the road, and his whole face came apart. And then it put itself back together into something hard, and he said, "You couldn't just let it go." "It was money, Dad. It was just money." I said, "Greg, it was never about the money." And it wasn't. I'd have given him the house. I'd have signed it over on a napkin at the George Webb if he'd walked in that door and sat down across from me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry, come home." He never said it. He hasn't said it yet. He's 55 now. I moved back into my house on the 1st of November. The suite still smelled like Roberta's cigarettes for a month. Maddie's sign was gone, thrown out, but I found a piece of it in the recycling bin behind the garage with the letters GRA on it, and I don't know why I kept it, but it's in a drawer. The first night I sat in my own kitchen at about 10 o'clock with the lights off and the refrigerator humming. And the furnace kicked on. That thump it does. And warm air came up out of the floor register and moved the curtain a little. And I put my head down on my own kitchen table and I cried for about 45 minutes. And I'm 83 years old now, and I don't apologize for that anymore. Nolan comes over every other Sunday. He's got his license now. Drives that same SUV. They somehow held on to it. And we watch whatever's on, and I make him a sandwich with Usinger's summer sausage and too much mustard. He doesn't talk about his mother, and I don't ask. Maddie won't come. She's 14, and she was told a story about me for 2 straight years, and you can't undo that with a sandwich. I keep her school picture on the fridge anyway. Greg and I speak twice a year. His birthday and Christmas. 11 minutes. Polite. The worst 11 minutes on my whole calendar. Not everything gets fixed. I need somebody out there to hear that from an old man, because I hear people talk about closure, like it's a thing you can go pick up at the counter. Here's what I've got instead. I've got the rose bush, which came through the winter again. I've got the doorbell camera, still on my account, still up on the wall. And every time somebody walks up my step, my phone makes a little noise. And I look at it, and I smile. Because that camera cost me $180, and it saved my whole life. And I've got mornings, That's the part nobody tells you about the other side of a thing like this. Not the courtroom, not the day the sheriff comes. The mornings. Getting up in a warm house that's yours, making the coffee too strong the way you like it, standing at your own window at 6 watching the plows go by. I made steel do what I told it to for 41 years, and I buried a woman I loved for 53 of them. Nobody gets to put that in a bag on a porch, so if there's somebody in your life with a hand out and it's family and you keep filling it, all right, fill it. Love them. Give them what you can spare. Just put your name on the paper. Keep the receipt. I'm not telling you they'll turn on you. God, I hope they never do. I'm telling you that if the day ever comes, that piece of paper is the only thing left in this world that will speak up for you. People keep asking me how a man my age ends up in a diner at 4 a.m. with everything he owns in the back of a Buick. I don't have a good answer for that. I raised him and I trusted him, and I thought those were the same thing. They aren't. I probably do it the same stupid way again. They're saying 40 degrees tomorrow. First time since November. I'm going to go out in the morning and look at the rose bush. Thanks for staying with me. Go call your dad.